Modern LEGO games are good dumb fun, but nobody could ever accuse them of taking too many risks. When you sit down to play one, you know exactly what you'll be getting, because if you scratch beneath the surface layer of whatever new franchise is on the box, the actual gameplay is the exact same winning formula Traveller's Tales discovered it in 2005. Just look at how similar the latest game in the series is to LEGO Indiana Jones, a game which came out a decade prior, and then know that there are 21 games in between those two which all share just as much of the same blood. LEGO games haven't always settled for following the same easy recipe, however. There was a period around the turn of the millennium where LEGO put out tens of games based on their own original concepts, almost all in completely different genres with inventive takes on established ideas, and almost all remembered fondly. This barely 3-year-long stretch of creative games are unofficially known as the LEGO Classics, and we're about to take a rose-tinted look at them to see why we love them and if they still hold up today. LEGO Rock Raiders, released in 1999, was a Dungeon Keeper-inspired real-time strategy game made by English developers Data Design Interactive, in which players took control of a team of spacefaring miners in a bid to construct a base and retrieve precious energy crystals, often fighting against limited oxygen supply or encroaching lava. It might sound basic now, but as a kid it was an extremely engaging setup. In fact, one of my earliest childhood memories is turning on the family computer first thing in the morning and retrying the same level over and over until looking up and realising it was 5 o'clock and I was still in my dressing gown. The other reason for that is that for a kids game, the difficulty ramped up hard. With all the time I spent playing it, I still never managed to beat the game, and the allure of what could possibly be behind the last level's giant imposing X grabbed me in the way that only video games can. So how easy is it to get Rock Raiders running on modern computers and finally find out what's hiding in that last level? Not very easy at all, as it turns out. A few years ago I tried to get the game working and had no success at all, but to my surprise, an obscure LEGO game from decades ago has somehow still held on to a loyal community of fans who have developed a ton of mods, information and third-party software that takes running the game from straight up impossible to just very difficult. Getting Rock Raiders to run feels like you're rebuilding it brick by brick, first fixing the installer, then the game just not starting, then the lack of cutscenes, then the glitches, and finally the music and resolution, with each step needing its own third-party software. But finally the game gave in to Windows 8 and we get to see just how it holds up to those childhood memories. Immediately the first thing to live up to expectations are the cutscenes, which, despite the low resolution, are all brilliantly animated and scored, with the game's intro being a 5-minute long setup of the game's plot, all told in the silent movie-like style from before LEGO characters were voiced, relying on slapstick humour and the odd grunt to get the point across in simple but charming ways. Travelling through the universe, the Rock Raiders, all aboard their ship, the LMS Explorer, drift into an asteroid field and are sucked into a huge wormhole, depositing them stranded and without power into an uncharted galaxy. Spotting Planet U, a nearby alien world rich with resources, the Raiders teleport down to the surface to try and mine enough energy crystals to power up the ship and get back home. That's about all the plot and setup the game needs, with all the other cutscenes showing light-hearted encounters with the alien life forms as a reward for unlocking a new set of levels. The game is split into 25 of these levels, with most tasking you with digging up a set amount of energy crystals, but it's the other levels which have you outrace lava lapping at the edge of your base or find stranded raiders in blocked cabins that are the most fun. All of the missions still mainly revolve around constructing and upgrading your base, and to do that you'll need resources from mining, but the added objective gives something else to work towards. That focus on building is what sets apart LEGO's take on RTSs from the ones that came before it, as combat is little more than a sideshow. You have to kit out your raiders with weapons beforehand and set up perimeter defences, but when a monster appears it's just a matter of hitting the "Action Stations" button and your raiders get the job done for you. There are only 3 types of enemy creature, as well as a monster that's slightly different in each of the 3 types of cavern: rock, ice and lava. But comparing that slightly disappointing enemy roster to the huge amount of vehicles you can use really shows where the priorities were. One thing completely new to me this time around was the background music, an ambient drum and bass type of thing, since, interestingly, the music is missing from all but the very original release of the game. This is because the music was originally burnt to the disc as an audio CD separate from the data of the rest of the game. A great idea at the time because it meant you could pop the game disc into any CD player and listen to the soundtrack anywhere, but it backfired when the developers re-releasing the game just didn't even realise it was on there, assuming there wasn't supposed to be background music. While it is a pretty good score, there are only 3 tracks at about 3 minutes each, so they do get repetitive, and none of them are quite as good as the atmospheric main title music, which sets a surprisingly dark and oppressive tone for a LEGO game, with its bass notes and sounds of cave-dwelling creatures. In contrast, and exactly as I remembered, are the infinitely quotable, some would say awful, voiceover lines constantly popping off.
An energy crystal has been found.
Power drop.
But it's hard to understate just how often they play. Literally every HUD button and on-screen item is narrated, and it gets to the point where you're almost scared to stop moving the mouse for a second in case you
teleport Rock Raider to planet.
I unironically love these voice lines, and they do actually serve a good purpose for young players who might not be able to remember what all the icons in an RTS game mean, but it gets to a point where they start to repeat so quickly they overlap themselves, and it's awful.
A landslide has occurred. A landslide has occurred. A landslide has occurred. A landslide has occurred.
Cannot upgrade building.
A landslide has occurred. A landslide has occurred.
Luckily, getting stuck in a landslide Groundhog Day can be easily fixed by tweaking the game files, and there are a couple of other things I'd recommend modding in there at the same time, for sanity's sake. Game speed is a feature of all good strategy games, letting you speed up when everything's all going as planned, and Rock Raiders has it too, but any dangerous event lowers the game speed back down to the default, slower than dirt setting so you can deal with them. Unfortunately, as we just saw, some levels are in a state of perpetual landslide, so that auto slowing needs to go. Then there's the particularly annoying infinite laser drain glitch that causes all your hard-earned crystals to vanish without a trace, but can be fixed by tweaking one line of code. There are also mods and tweaks to restore some of the content that went unused in the final game, such as one that lets you make a saxophone band of raiders to play as your ship goes down, and there were even a few more enemy creatures planned that would have added some welcome variety to the combat. In fact, there's an absurd amount of cut content in the game. 30MB of its 80MB size, that's almost 40%, is unused, and animations like that saxophone one were part of an idle system that LEGO requested removed, simply because they didn't have official LEGO saxophone blocks at the time. Sadly, one thing that can't be fixed by mods is the AI, and that's the one thing holding the game back from the rose-tinted version of it I had in my memory. As a kid, bad AI isn't something you notice, but looking back now and seeing Rock Raiders launched at the same time as Age of Empires 2, a game which is still held up as maybe the best RTS game ever, it's hard not to notice some of the more glaring problems with how it plays. Rock Raiders have what I like to call the dibs system, where when you give an order, one unit will reserve dibs on it, and until it is done or cancelled, no other raider will touch it. There's no way of seeing which stubborn raider this is, and sod's law it's likely the guy 10 minutes walk away holding up your crucial life support building. The game tries to solve the problem of fiddly micromanagement with a priorities menu, which works to, in theory, let you set all your units to work on the same job at once. But really it's more of a suggestion, with your raiders all having a perplexing love for shoveling up rubble, no matter what else you'd rather they do, and giving a command deselects your unit so complex orders aren't really possible. But despite all that, if Rock Raiders could have stolen just one thing from Age of Empires, and boy I wish they'd just ran in there with a big duffel bag and taken a whole lot more, it would be the town bell system, where all your men run back to base with a single click. As it is, especially on the larger levels, there's no way to round up all your stragglers who've run off to the furthest end of a cavern and are sat there wasting your oxygen. Despite those AI problems, when you finally get to that last level, which turns out to be a big satisfying victory lap after the harder penultimate levels, simply asking you to build as much as you want and collect a ridiculous amount of crystals, there's no denying it's still an appealing game. The final cutscene shows the LMS Explorer being powered back up by the insane amount of energy you've collected, and it's even very slightly different depending on how many levels you beat, either setting off slowly or warping back home at max speed 11. Despite being fiddly to get working and not as flawless as I remembered it, Rock Raiders has just as much character and charm as it did back in the 90s, and while I wouldn't say it will hold up today to someone who's never played old RTS games, anybody who has and wants to go back to it will probably have just as much of a fun time as I did. However, there's one grimy and overlooked part of Rock Raiders' history that no amount of fondness can fix, and that's the PS1 port. Yes, like all games of the era, you knew you hadn't made it until you were on the PlayStation, but while the main game's development was far from smooth sailing, the PlayStation port proved to be an absolute nightmare for everyone involved. 6 months before the scheduled deadline of Rock Raiders PS1, during the home stretch of finishing the PC version, phones rang in Data Design Interactive's Birmingham headquarters. LEGO Media's boss had suddenly decided, likely based off of Command & Conquer's drop in sales, that point-and-click strategy games might perform fine on PC, but just wouldn't sell on console, decreeing that the game would have to be completely gutted and turned into an action game. DDI handed over development to David Upchurch, who had, the year prior, worked on the rather great LEGO Chess, along with little more than an engine and some vehicle models. Despite trying his hardest, Upchurch knew they'd never be able to make a great game. The deadline was just too close, and so set about just trying to make it as good as possible while differentiating it from the PC version. The game had you control just one Rock Raider at a time, having you pick between each of the named characters that appeared in the LEGO sets, each with a special ability, getting rid of the building mechanics and pushing blaster combat to the forefront. The game actually did quite well on a few fronts, changing the ranking system to give medals instead of a percentage, having extra levels with 2-player multiplayer, albeit the buggy kind, and reintroducing some enemies that were cut from the PC version, such as lumbering rock whales and scorpions, some of which fire glowing magic orbs at you for reasons. They even cribbed the excellent cutscenes from the PC version, but unfortunately it was just rocky and cobbled together, even by 1999 standards. The Rock Raider sprites were tiny, well beneath what the console was capable of putting out, and despite coming out less than a year before the PS2 launched, the game didn't work with the DualShock analog sticks and, even more damningly, used a password system instead of saving to the memory card, like other games had been doing for 5 years at this point. Time came for the unrealistic deadline and the worst happened. Sony Europe accepted the game, but Sony America said it didn't meet their standards and refused to release it until some crucial changes were made. LEGO took this opportunity, and an extra 4 months, to redo all of the levels of the American NTSC version of the game, essentially meaning both regions got a completely different game, and kind of defeating the point of all that rushing. The original PAL version had more levels, but after being redone, the NTSC version has more polish in general, replacing the stock-looking loading screens, adding a tile sliding minigame, and you know I love me some minigames, more sound effects, and a much better jump than the awful one in the original, complete with jetpack trail, which makes getting around much less tedious and is necessary for the very light platforming in the American version. The biggest change between the two is the level structure. Europe's levels start and end at the teleport pad, having you expand outwards to mine much like the PC version, whereas the American version leans more into the new genre and has shorter, linear, point A to B missions, which are, at least to start with, tailored to each specific character's ability. The European version instead lets you pick from any of the 5 characters right off the bat, but does nothing to balance for that. Picking the guy that can walk in water lets you skip a good chunk of the levels entirely without having to mine a thing, which you'll be wanting to take advantage of because the time it takes to mine anything is excruciatingly slow, more so than any other version. For some reason, possibly because its levels are closer to the PC version, the PAL version is generally considered the better one, but to me it feels like a halfway done conversion between the two genres, and doing anything takes so much longer than it should. If I had to pick one, it would be the NTSC version, but honestly, they're just bad. They even use screenshots of the PC version on the back of the box to trick you into buying it. Shame. Despite the bad PlayStation port, Rock Raiders didn't completely disappear into the past. There have been numerous fan remake projects over the years, all seemingly abandoned as is often the way with fan projects, but each one gets further along. And the latest of them, Cave Raiders, which reimagined the game as a first or third person co-op building game, has a surprisingly playable prototype build with mining vehicles and even multiplayer. All this continued community interest got the attention of Stuart Green, the CEO of the original developers, who announced plans for a revival or sequel to the game, even using the official name as LEGO had let the Rock Raiders trademark lapse, and featuring non-LEGO versions of the characters. This sounded like a dream come true for fans of the series, but people who followed the devs were sceptical right off the bat, as DDI had, despite the obvious hard work and care they'd put into Rock Raiders, gained the wrong sort of reputation in the years afterwards, going on to make nothing but shovelware Wii games, including the infamously terrible Ninja Bread Man, which appeared on many worst game of all time lists. Even their first game, Conquer Earth, the RTS that gave them the experience to win the contract for Rock Raiders, was met with pretty resoundingly bad reviews at the time. So, unsurprisingly, when DDI ceased development in 2009, eventually folding in 2012, the idea of a Rock Raiders remake was canned, leaving the original as the exception, possibly their only fondly remembered game in the last 20 years. So, without a true spiritual successor, what games scratch that same itch now that Rock Raiders did as a kid? In truth, there's nothing that quite matches that same mix of building, combat and exploration. Even with the huge explosion in popularity of mining games after Minecraft, none have gone for the RTS genre, and RTS games continue to focus far more on combat than building. Banished is a city builder that has the right feeling of building up a thriving base from nothing, and it's a good game in its own right, but it doesn't have combat. Deep Rock Galactic is a very cool looking game about a group of miners in space, clearing out alien caverns and fighting the creatures inside them, so pretty much bang on with the plot, but it plays as a co-op FPS more in the vein of Left 4 Dead. Factorio also embodies the theme of starting out with nothing and building up, in this case to huge industrial complexes, even with a little bit of Lego Loco thrown in there, and has alien creatures you need to build up your defences against. And finally, Oxygen Not Included is an ant farm-like base builder where you try to keep astronauts alive in what I imagine Fallout Shelter would be like if it gave you control over everything, as well as sharing systems like Sanity with their previous game, Don't Starve. Thanks for joining me on this trip down memory lane, and I hope to see you again when a new challenger approaches, on the next episode of Nostalgia Study.